It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Sloane Thorne laughed as she poured the vintage crystal over Maya Thorne's dress in front of the entire gala. The pale gold liquid cascaded down the unbranded, midnight blue silk, soaking into the fabric and pooling at Maya's feet on the polished Italian marble. A collective gasp rippled through the circle of socialites, followed by a suffocating silence that was quickly punctured by Sloane's sharp, performative giggle. "Oh, Maya, I am so sorry," Sloane said, though her eyes danced with malicious glee. She adjusted the heavy, logo-encrusted strap of her Dior bag, making sure the gold hardware caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. "I didn't see you standing there. You just blend into the shadows in that drab little outfit. It's practically a public service, really. That dress was doing you no favors." Maya Thorne didn't flinch. She felt the cold, sticky weight of the champagne seeping through her slip, but her expression remained as unreadable as a frozen lake. She didn't wipe the droplets from her collarbone. Instead, she looked past her sister toward the man standing a few feet away. Julian Vane watched the scene with a flick of his lighter, the flame illuminating his sharp, aristocratic features. He didn't move to help. He simply observed the interaction with the detached curiosity of a man watching an ant being crushed. Beside him, Richard Thorne cleared his throat, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. "Maya, for heaven's sake," Richard said, stepping forward not to comfort his eldest daughter, but to shield the view of the surrounding guests. "Go to the powder room and clean yourself up. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Maya asked, her voice low and steady. It was the quiet power she had cultivated over years of building Aegis cyber systems in the dark, away from the flashbulbs that Sloane lived for. "Your father is right," Evelyn Thorne whispered, appearing at Richard's side. She smelled of expensive lilies and gin, her eyes darting around to ensure no one was filming the family's internal friction. "Look at you, dripping all over the floor. Sloane didn't mean it. Just go home, dear. You don't really belong at an event of this caliber anyway. It's for influencers and innovators." Sloane smirked, leaning into Julian's arm. "See, even Mom knows. Why don't you take one of those rideshare apps? I'd offer you a lift in my new Ferrari, but I'd hate for the upholstery to get stained with cheap sparkling wine." The loud luxury of the room felt like a physical weight. The cloying scent of tuberose perfume, the blinding glitter of leased diamonds, and the arrogant tilt of Sloane's chin. Sloane believed she was the sun, and Maya was merely a cold moon reflecting her light. She had no idea that Maya owned the very firm currently conducting a deep-dive audit of the Thorne family's architectural empire. Maya felt a sharp vibration against her wrist. Her watch, a bespoke piece of high-end security tech disguised as a simple, unbranded timepiece, gave 3 distinct pulses. It was the signal from Aunt Beatrice. The forensic sweep was complete. The forged signatures Richard had used to dilute Maya's inheritance weren't just discovered. They were digitized and ready for deployment. "You're right, Sloane," Maya said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. She reached into her small, hand-stitched clutch and pulled out a microfiber cloth, calmly dabbing a single drop of wine from her wrist. "I don't belong here. This room is filled with people who value the label more than the substance." Sloane rolled her eyes, turning back to Julian. "God, she's so dramatic. Julian, tell her how much you spent on my engagement ring. Maybe then she'll understand what real status looks like." Julian didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on Maya's watch. He was a venture capitalist. He knew a piece of custom engineering when he saw one. For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, but Sloane pulled his arm, drawing his attention back to her performative pout. Maya turned her gaze to her father. Richard Thorne refused to meet her eyes, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for a fresh drink from a passing waiter's tray. He knew what he had done. He just didn't think Maya was smart enough to find the trail. "I'll leave," Maya said, her calm demeanor acting as a chilling contrast to the frantic energy of the gala. "But before I go, Father, you should check your secure server. There's a dividend report waiting for you. I think you'll find the numbers." Illuminating. "What are you talking about?" Richard snapped, his voice cracking. "Just a little family business," Maya replied. She turned her head slightly, catching Sloane's triumphant grin. "Enjoy the party, Sloane. Take lots of photos. You'll want something to remember this night by." As Maya walked toward the exit, the sound of her heels on the marble was the only steady rhythm in the room. She didn't look back at the wine-stained floor or the parents who had traded her soul for social standing. Once outside in the cool night air, she pulled out her phone. The screen glowed with a secure connection. A single message sat in the center of the display from Aunt Beatrice. "The Trojan horse is in the stable. Just say the word." Maya watched a valet pull Sloane's neon-wrapped Ferrari to the front of the club, the engine roaring with a desperate need for attention. She looked at her own modest, armored sedan waiting at the curb, a vehicle that cost 4 times as much as the Ferrari but looked like a shadow in the night. She stepped into the back seat, the door closing with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud that silenced the world. "Beatrice," Maya said into the hands-free system. "I'm here, Maya. We have the bank records, the offshore transfers, and the original deed. Richard has no idea the walls are already gone." Maya watched the gala lights through the tinted glass. "Good. Don't trigger the freeze yet. I want them to feel like they've won for exactly 48 hours. I want Sloane to post every single photo of that ring and that party. And then..." Maya's eyes went cold, the sleeping lion finally baring its teeth. "And then we show them who actually owns the Thorne name. 2 days, Beatrice. The countdown starts now." The next morning, the Thorne estate smelled of cloying Casablanca lilies and the metallic tang of a high-end espresso machine. Maya Thorne sat at the edge of the mahogany breakfast table, her posture a stark contrast to the slumped, hungover arrogance of the man across from her. She watched as her sister adjusted the lighting on her phone, hovering a forkful of avocado toast over a plate that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sloane Thorne didn't look up from her screen. "Move your coffee, Maya. You're ruining the aesthetic of the marble. My followers don't want to see a chipped mug in the shot." "It isn't chipped," she replied calmly, though she moved the cup. Her eyes drifted to the heavy, gold-leafed invitations stacked at the center of the table. "It's drab, like that sweater." Her sister finally looked up, her eyes flicking over her with a sneer. "Honestly, Julian, I don't know how she's related to us. She looks like she's about to go file taxes for a nonprofit." Julian Vane, seated at the head of the table, didn't laugh. He was staring at a digital contract on his tablet, his brow furrowed. He was a man who lived by the sword of due diligence, and for the first time, Maya saw a flicker of doubt in the way his jaw tightened. "The audit for the Thorne architecture firm is taking longer than expected, Sloane. Your father mentioned the digital records were corrupted." "Technical glitch," Richard Thorne said, sweeping into the room with a theatrical flourish that couldn't quite hide the tremor in his hands. He wore a silk robe that billowed behind him like a cape. He squeezed Sloane's shoulder before turning a cold, dismissive gaze toward his eldest daughter. "Maya, I need you in the study after breakfast. There are some old trust documents that require a secondary signature, just a formality to clear up the title for the estate before the gala." Maya felt the weight of the phone in her pocket. A haptic buzz against her thigh confirmed a message from Beatrice. "The offshore trail is mapped. He's trying to transfer the house to Julian as collateral for a loan that doesn't exist." "I'm not signing anything today, Dad," she said, her voice steady. Richard's face darkened, the mask of the jovial patriarch slipping to reveal the desperate fraud beneath. "It wasn't a request. You've lived off the Thorne name long enough without contributing. The least you can do is help secure the family's future." "The family's future or your exit strategy?" The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the milk steamer in the kitchen. Sloane dropped her fork, the silver clattering sharply against the porcelain. "Excuse me." "You should be grateful we even let you stay in the guest wing. Julian is literally saving this legacy. He's investing $40 million into the firm tomorrow night." 42, actually," Julian corrected, his voice tight. He looked at Maya, his analytical gaze searching hers. "Is there something I should know, Maya?" Before she could speak, Evelyn Thorne entered, her face a masterpiece of expensive fillers and forced serenity. She placed a hand on Julian's arm, a silent plea for him to look away from the truth. "Don't listen to her, Julian. She's always been jealous of Sloane's light. She wants to stir up drama because she has nothing of her own." "I have exactly what I need," she said, standing up. She didn't look at her mother. She looked directly at Richard, who was staring at her with a mixture of fear and fury. "I'll see you at the gala in 48 hours. I hope the catering is as authentic as the balance sheets." She turned and walked toward the foyer, the sound of her flat loafers echoing on the marble, a quiet, rhythmic thud against the frantic, high-pitched clicking of Sloane's heels as her sister chased after her. "You think you're so smart," Sloane hissed, grabbing her arm in the hallway. The scent of her expensive, suffocating perfume filled the air. "But by Saturday night, Julian will be my husband, and you'll be an asterisk in our history. Dad is announcing the merger. We're going to be the most powerful couple in the city, and you'll be lucky if I hire you as a secretary." Maya gently unhooked her sister's manicured fingers from her sleeve. She leaned in, her voice a whisper that carried the weight of a falling guillotine. "Post as many photos as you can today, Sloane. Make sure everyone sees that ring. Make sure they see the house. Because in 2 days, the only thing you'll have left is the digital footprint of a life you never actually owned." She walked out the front door, leaving her sister standing in the shadows of a mansion that was already, legally, a ghost. As she stepped into her car, she checked the countdown on her watch. 47 hours and 59 minutes. The lion was no longer sleeping. It was simply choosing the most public place to strike. The following afternoon, the air in Aunt Beatrice's private study felt like a different world, one where the scent of bitter espresso and old parchment replaced the cloying, floral perfumes of the Thorne estate. Maya Thorne sat across from her aunt, watching the older woman's eyes dart across 3 different monitors. The hum of high-end servers tucked into the corner of the room provided a steady, mechanical heartbeat to the silence. Beatrice tapped a key, and a series of documents bloomed across the center screen. "It's worse than we thought, Maya," she said, her voice gravelly and precise. "Richard didn't just move the funds. He used a deep-level administrative override to alter the original founding documents of Aegis. In the cloud-based ledger, your name has been completely scrubbed from the initial patent filings." Maya leaned forward, her fingers brushing the cold, brushed aluminum of an encrypted drive on the desk. She didn't flinch. She had expected a theft, but this was an erasure. Her father had attempted to rewrite history itself, turning her years of architectural coding into a ghost story. "He backdated a digital resignation," Beatrice continued, pointing to a string of metadata. "According to this forger's trail, you stepped down and signed over your intellectual property 3 years ago. It's a sophisticated loop, but he made one mistake. He forgot that you built the original blockchain architecture. You didn't just leave a trail, you left a shadow." The shrill, melodic ping of a social media notification cut through the room. Maya glanced at her phone. Sloane Thorne had just posted a new reel. The video showed her sister standing in a boutique, draped in a necklace of cascading canary diamonds, the Thorne family heirloom that was supposed to be passed to the firstborn daughter on her wedding day. "Final fitting for the big night," the caption flashed in glittering gold font. "So blessed that Dad knows exactly what I deserve." Some people are born to wear diamonds, and others are born to watch them shine. Sloane turned for the camera, the diamonds catching the light with a blinding, expensive glare. She blew a kiss to her followers, her smile the picture of polished, unearned triumph. It was a public slap, a declaration that the birthright Maya had earned through sweat and intellect had been handed over as a bauble to a girl who couldn't explain the company's basic profit margins. Maya's phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a notification. It was a call from Richard Thorne. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Yes, Father." "I saw you left the house early," Richard said, his voice booming with the practiced authority of a man who believed his own lies. "I hope you're using this time to find something appropriate to wear for the rehearsal dinner tonight. And by appropriate, I mean something that doesn't make you look like the help. Julian's family will be there, and I won't have you embarrassing us with your minimalist nonsense." "I have everything I need, Richard," she replied, her voice a level, frozen lake. "Don't use that tone with me. You need to understand your place, Maya. You're a liability to this merger right now. If you so much as breathe a word about your contributions to Julian or the board, I will make sure you are blacklisted from every tech firm in this hemisphere. You're only at that table tonight because I'm a generous man who cares about family optics. Try to be grateful for the allowance I'm still giving you." "I'm very aware of exactly what you've given me," she said. "Good. Be at the Sterling Hotel by 7, and for God's sake, try to look happy for your sister. She's actually accomplished something with her life." The line went dead. Maya set the phone down on the mahogany desk. The rage was there, a sharp, white-hot needle in her chest, but she didn't let it reach her face. She looked back at Beatrice, who was holding a printed sheet of paper, the original, uncorrupted timestamp of the Aegis founding. "He thinks he's erased you," Beatrice whispered. "He has no idea you're the one holding the eraser." Maya stood up, tucking the encrypted drive into the inner pocket of her bespoke, unbranded blazer. The weight of it felt like a weapon. "He's so blinded by Sloane's loud luxury that he's forgotten how I operate. He thinks power is the person standing at the head of the table making the toast." She walked toward the door, her footsteps silent on the thick rug. She paused at the threshold, checking the time. The rehearsal dinner started in 4 hours. Julian Vane, the man Sloane thought she had won, was a man of cold, hard metrics. He valued due diligence above all else. He was about to receive the most thorough audit of his life. "Tonight isn't about the toast," Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of an approaching storm. "Tonight is about the fine print." She stepped out into the hallway, the countdown in her head hitting the 24-hour mark. The stage was set, the witnesses were invited, and the only thing missing was the moment the arrogant finally realized that the floor beneath them had been sold weeks ago. The glass-walled conservatory was a cage of light perched 40 stories above the city. 2 hours had passed since Maya Thorne left her sanctuary, and the transition from the cold steel of her office to the suffocating scent of forced lilies was jarring. She stood near the entrance, adjusting the cuff of her unbranded silk blouse. To the untrained eye, it was a simple cream top. To those who knew, the hand-rolled edges and the weight of the 22-mom silk spoke of a tax bracket the rest of the room couldn't fathom. Sloane Thorne was already at the center of the room, a whirlwind of tulle and performative joy. She was draped in a gown that featured 3 different designer logos stitched into the lace, a walking billboard for Julian Vane's venture capital success. When she spotted her sister, her smile didn't reach her eyes. It sharpened. "Maya, you actually made it," Sloane said, her voice carrying just enough to ensure the nearby cluster of socialites heard. She stepped closer, the sharp click of her designer heels echoing on the marble floor. "I was worried you'd be too embarrassed to show up in something so understated. It's my rehearsal dinner, not a library fundraiser." Maya didn't flinch. She felt the cool condensation of a water glass against her palm, a grounding contrast to the heat of her sister's arrogance. "I find that the most important things don't need to scream for attention, Sloane." Sloane laughed, a shrill, entitled sound that set Maya's teeth on edge. "Spoken like someone who's given up. Just try to stay in the shadows tonight, okay? Julian's partners are here, and I'd hate for them to think my sister is the help." The insult hung in the air, a deliberate rage spike, designed to draw a reaction. Maya simply took a slow sip of her water, her eyes tracking Julian Vane across the room. He was standing by the bar, his sharp, analytical gaze fixed on Maya. He was a man of cold metrics, and for the first time he looked like he was struggling to solve an equation. He had seen Maya's steady hands, her lack of desperation, and the way she occupied the space with the stillness of a predator. Richard Thorne approached them then, his arm draped over Evelyn's shoulders with a paternal warmth that Maya knew was as forged as her signature on the Aegis documents. "Maya, glad you're here," Richard said, though his eyes warned her. "Don't ruin this for your sister. She's worked hard to secure this union. Just play your part." "My part is very clear to me, Father," she replied, her voice like a chilling breeze. She turned her gaze back to Sloane, who was busy admiring the 10-carat rock on her finger. By the way, Sloane, did you happen to review the final asset disclosure Julian's legal team sent over this morning? The one regarding the Thorne family holdings? Sloane waved a manicured hand dismissively, the diamonds catching the light. Julian handles the boring stuff. I just sign where he tells me. He says we're consolidating everything under the Vane umbrella. It's more efficient. You really should look at the fine print, Maya whispered, leaning in just enough so that only her sister could hear. Sometimes the things you think you're inheriting are actually just debts you haven't been billed for yet. Sloane's brow furrowed for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before her ego smoothed it over. You're just jealous. Tomorrow I become a Vane and you stay a Thorne, a name that's losing value by the second. Maya felt the weight of the digital key in her clutch, the one Aunt Beatrice had confirmed was now linked to the Aegis server. The secret power moment was quiet, contained within the small, knowing smile Maya gave her sister. She saw Julian watching them, his glass paused halfway to his lips. He knew something had shifted. He just didn't know the floor was already gone. We'll see what has value in the morning, Maya said. She turned and walked toward the balcony, leaving her family to their champagne and their lies. The countdown in her head was no longer in hours, but in heartbeats. As she reached the edge of the glass, she pulled out her phone. A single message sat there from Beatrice. The audit is live. The board receives the notification at 9:00 a.m. Maya looked out at the city, the lights flickering like a dying pulse. Tomorrow wasn't just a wedding. It was a forensic deconstruction. She felt no guilt, only the cold, hard satisfaction of a trap finally snapping shut. The night before the end was surprisingly quiet. She took one last look at the room, at the logos, the laughter, and the father who thought he had won, and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed on the music, leaving her in a silence that felt like a promise. The evening of the Fairmont Gala arrived with a heavy, oppressive elegance that tasted of expensive lilies and desperation. Maya Thorne stepped out of the black car, the chill of the city air biting at her shoulders before she disappeared into the gilded warmth of the hotel lobby. She wore a bespoke gown of midnight blue silk, devoid of any visible branding or ostentatious shimmer. It was a garment that didn't scream for attention. It simply commanded the space it occupied. Her fingers brushed the small, cold weight of the encrypted drive tucked into her clutch, a digital guillotine waiting for the morning sun. The ballroom was a sea of loud luxury. Gold leaf clung to every pillar, and the scent of over-applied perfume hung thick enough to choke the string quartet playing near the entrance. She saw them immediately at the center of the room, positioned under the largest crystal chandelier like a royal court of paper kings. Sloane Thorne was draped in gold sequins that caught the light with a frantic, blinding intensity. She held a champagne flute as if it were a scepter, her laugh ringing out too loud and too sharp. When she spotted Maya, her expression shifted from performative joy to a practiced, condescending pity. "Maya, darling," Sloane said, her voice carrying easily to the circle of socialites surrounding her. She reached out, fingering the hem of Maya's sleeve with a manicured hand. "I'm so glad you found something to wear. It's very sensible, though I suppose not everyone can handle the weight of a designer original for an event of this magnitude." A few of the women in the circle tittered behind their hands. Maya didn't flinch. She felt the familiar heat of Sloane's arrogance, but tonight it didn't burn. It was merely data. "It's comfortable," Maya replied, her voice a cool contrast to her sister's frantic energy. "And it's durable. Some things are designed to last, Sloane. Others just look good under specific lighting." Sloane's eyes narrowed, the insult landing just beneath her skin. Before she could retort, Julian Vane stepped into the circle. He looked every bit the ruthless venture capitalist, his tuxedo tailored with a precision that mirrored his reputation. He offered Maya a nod that was more an assessment than a greeting. "Julian," Maya said, acknowledging him, "I hear the merger is the talk of the evening. Quite a bit of due diligence for one weekend, isn't it?" "Precision is the only thing that prevents regret," Julian replied. his gaze lingering on her for a second too long. He was a man who lived by the numbers, and Maya knew that by 9:01 tomorrow morning, those numbers would fail to add up for the Thorne family. Richard Thorne approached then, his face flushed with a mixture of scotch and a simmering, nervous energy. He didn't look Maya in the eye. Instead, he placed a heavy hand on Sloane's shoulder, a gesture of ownership and pride that felt increasingly hollow. "There she is," Richard said, gesturing to Sloane. "The face of the new Thorne legacy. Julian, I hope you realize you're not just marrying into a family, you're investing in an empire." "I've always been very careful with my investments, Richard," Julian said, his voice devoid of warmth. Richard turned his attention to Maya, his eyes hardening. He leaned in, the smell of expensive peat and anxiety rolling off him in waves. "Try not to look so grim, Maya. This is a celebration. If you can't contribute to the atmosphere, at least stay in the shadows where you won't be a distraction. We have a lot riding on the optics tonight." "The optics are fascinating, Father," she said softly. "It's amazing what people see when they aren't looking for the truth." He huffed, turning back to the more important guests, leaving Maya standing on the periphery. She felt a presence at her elbow and didn't need to turn to know it was Aunt Beatrice. The older woman was dressed in a sharp, charcoal suit, looking more like a high-stakes litigator than a guest. "Board server just pinged," Beatrice whispered, her eyes fixed on a tray of passing hors d'oeuvres. "The automated delivery is queued. At 9:00 a.m., the forensic audit hits every director's inbox simultaneously. There's no way for Richard to intercept it." Maya took a slow breath, the sound of the ballroom, the clinking of crystal, the shallow laughter, the rustle of silk, feeling like a countdown. "And Julian. His personal office is on the distribution list," Beatrice confirmed. "He'll see the forgery before he even puts on his wedding tie." Maya looked across the room. Sloane was now standing on a small dais, gesturing for silence as she prepared to give a pre-wedding toast. She looked radiant, entitled, and utterly oblivious. She was a woman who had spent her entire life stepping on Maya's shadow, never realizing that the shadow was the only thing keeping her grounded. Sloane tapped her glass with a silver spoon. The sound was sharp, like a crack in thin ice. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward the golden girl of the Thorne family. "Tonight is about more than just love," Sloane began, her voice projecting with influencer-trained perfection. "It's about the power of a name. The Thorne name stands for excellence, for heritage, and for a future that none of you can even imagine yet." Maya watched her father beam with pride. She watched Evelyn Thorne, her mother, adjust her pearls with a shaky, complicit hand. They were all so certain. They were so convinced that the lies they had woven were thick enough to hold the weight of their ambitions. Sloane raised her glass higher, her eyes finding Maya's in the crowd. There was a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph in them, a final I won delivered before the ultimate prize. "To the Thorne legacy," Sloane announced, "and to the fact that some of us were born to lead, while others were simply born to watch." The room erupted in applause. Maya raised her empty hand in a mock salute, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She could wait 12 more hours. The silence of the morning was going to be much louder than the cheering of the night. As the crowd surged toward the buffet, Maya felt a vibration in her clutch. She stepped back into a quiet alcove and pulled out her phone. A single notification sat on the screen from the Aegis security system. Internal audit breach detected. Origin, Thorne private server. Status, verified. The trap hadn't just snapped shut, it was already beginning to crush. Maya looked up to see Julian Vane watching her from across the room, his phone in his hand, his brow furrowed in a way that suggested his evening was about to become very, very complicated. The countdown wasn't in hours anymore. It was in heartbeats. The vibration in Maya's clutch was a steady, rhythmic pulse, the heartbeat of a dying empire. She didn't look at Julian Vane as she moved through the crowd, though she could feel his gaze burning into her back. The scent of expensive lilies and Sloane's heavy, cloying perfume hung in the air, thick enough to choke. "Where do you think you're going?" Sloane Thorne stepped into her path, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble. She held a crystal flute of champagne like a scepter, her eyes narrowed with a cruelty that had been honed over decades of entitlement. "The help is supposed to be in the kitchen, Maya. Or did you forget which door you crawled through?" Maya didn't stop. She didn't even blink. She simply walked past her sister, her shoulder brushing against Sloane's silk sleeve. "Watch the dress, Sloane. It's the only thing you actually own tonight." The rage spike in Sloane's voice was instantaneous. "You pathetic little." But Maya was already at the tech podium. The technician, a young man Aunt Beatrice had quietly placed on the payroll weeks ago, stepped aside without a word. Maya slid the small, cold metal drive into the port. The low, electrical hum of the massive LED screen behind the stage changed pitch, a subtle shift that only she seemed to notice. Richard Thorne was mid-sentence, his arm draped around a high-profile investor, his voice booming with the false confidence of a man who believed his own lies. "And that is why the Thorne legacy is the bedrock of this industry," he declared, gesturing toward the screen where a montage of his achievements was supposed to play. Maya pressed a single key. The screen didn't show the Thorne estate or the Aegis headquarters. Instead, it flickered to a high-resolution scan of a ledger, the real one. Then, a side-by-side comparison of two signatures. One was Richard's genuine hand. The other was a clumsy, desperate forgery on a document that transferred Maya's inheritance into a shell company. The room went tomb silent. The only sound was the faint bubbles popping in 100 untouched glasses. Richard's face underwent a violent, silent transformation. The smug, practiced mask of the patriarch didn't just slip, it disintegrated. His skin, usually a healthy, expensive tan, turned the color of damp ash. His jaw went slack, revealing the slight tremor in his bottom lip that he couldn't suppress. His eyes, once sharp with calculated arrogance, darted frantically across the room, widening until the whites were visible all the way around the irises. A single bead of sweat broke from his hairline and tracked a slow, jagged path down his temple, glistening under the stage lights like a teardrop of pure panic. He looked smaller, suddenly, as if the very air had been sucked out of his lungs, leaving him a hollowed-out shell of the man who had walked into the room an hour ago. "What is this?" Julian Vane's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. He stepped toward the screen, his brow furrowed as he scanned the data. As a venture capitalist, he recognized the Aegis internal audit markers immediately. He turned to Richard, his expression shifting from confusion to a cold, predatory disgust. "Richard, these are embezzlement records, and that's a federal forgery notification." Evelyn Thorne gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her pearls clinking softly in the stillness. She looked at her husband, then at the screen, and finally at Maya. She didn't move to help him. She took a deliberate step back, her heels scuffing the floor as she distanced herself from the man she had spent 20 years protecting. Two board members at the front table stood up simultaneously, their faces twisted in outrage. One of them, a woman who had known Richard for 30 years, threw her linen napkin onto the table as if discarding something filthy. Maya stepped up to the microphone. The feedback was a sharp, piercing chirp that made Sloane flinch. Maya looked directly at her father, then at her sister, who was frozen with her mouth half open, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "You spent 20 years building a throne out of stolen wood," Maya said, her voice calm, echoing with a quiet power that filled every corner of the ballroom. "I'm just here to light the match." She didn't wait for his explanation. She didn't stay to hear Sloane's screams or the investors' demands for blood. She turned and walked toward the grand exit, the heavy oak doors swinging open for her. Behind her, the Thorne legacy wasn't just falling, it was being erased. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she heard the first sound of a glass shattering inside. It sounded like justice. The silence following Maya Thorne's exit was a brittle, suffocating thing, shattered only by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the projector. On the massive silk screen, the evidence of 20 years of systemic fraud remained illuminated in high definition, a digital tombstone for the Thorne legacy. Sloane Thorne was the first to move, though it wasn't toward the screen. She lunged for Julian Vane, her fingers, tipped with blood-red manicured nails, clutching at the sleeve of his bespoke tuxedo. Her face was a study in structural failure. The carefully applied porcelain foundation seemed to crack as her jaw worked soundlessly, her mouth hanging open in a jagged, ugly line. Her eyes, usually sharp with calculated malice, were now blown wide, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks against the sudden, harsh glare of the ballroom lights. The high, sculpted flush of her cheekbones had vanished, replaced by a sickly, grayish pallor that made her look decades older in an instant. Her nostrils flared with every ragged, shallow breath, and a frantic tremor took hold of her lower lip, vibrating with a pathetic intensity that betrayed the total collapse of her composure. "Julian, it's a fabrication," she hissed, her voice cracking like dry glass. "She's jealous. She's always been a pathetic, creative liar. You know how she is. Tell them it's fake." Julian didn't look at her. He didn't even flinch as her grip tightened, wrinkling the expensive wool of his jacket. He was staring at the screen, his eyes scanning the forensic audit trails Aunt Beatrice had meticulously unearthed. As a venture capitalist who had built a career on spotting the slightest hint of a bad investment, he knew exactly what he was looking at. He wasn't seeing a family drama. He was seeing a criminal liability. "The routing numbers," Julian said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, clinical detachment. "They match the accounts I flagged during due diligence. The ones your father swore were offshore reserves." Richard Thorne stepped forward then, his face a mottled purple, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the ballroom's aggressive air conditioning. The smell of expensive floral arrangements in the room had turned cloying, heavy with the scent of a funeral. He waved a frantic hand at the AV technician in the back. "Turn it off. This is private family business. I'll have you fired. I'll have all of you sued for defamation." But no one moved to help him. The board members, men and women who had toasted to Richard's health only 20 minutes prior, were now stepping back. It was a physical retreat, a synchronized withdrawal of social capital. The woman who had thrown her napkin earlier now turned her back completely, whispering into the ear of a prominent journalist from the city's largest financial paper. "Family business." Julian finally turned to look at Richard, his expression one of pure, unadulterated disgust. He reached out and peeled Sloane's hand off his arm as if he were removing a piece of unwanted lint. "You used my firm's pending merger to cover the hole in your balance sheets, Richard. That isn't family business. That's securities fraud." "Julian, darling, please," Sloane pleaded, her voice rising into a frantic, high-pitched whine that grated against the ears of everyone in the room. "We're supposed to be married in 3 weeks. The invitations, the venue, everything is set. You can't let her do this to us." "There is no us, Sloane," Julian replied, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "There is only a catastrophic breach of contract. My lawyers will be in touch by morning. Don't bother calling." He turned on his heel and walked toward the exit, his stride purposeful and devoid of regret. His departure was the signal the rest of the room needed. The exodus was swift. The elite of the city, the people Sloane had spent her entire life trying to impress, began to flow toward the doors in a silent, judging tide. They left behind their half-eaten lobster and their vintage champagne, fleeing the stench of a falling house. Richard collapsed into one of the gold-leafed chairs, the wood groaning under his weight. He looked small, the loud luxury of his tailored suit now appearing like a costume that no longer fit. Evelyn Thorne stood beside him, her hand hovering near his shoulder but never quite touching him. She looked toward the door where Maya had vanished, her expression a haunting mixture of grief and a dawning, terrifying realization that she had chosen the wrong side of history. Aunt Beatrice stepped out from the shadows near the bar, her sensible heels clicking softly on the marble. She held a single, thick manila envelope. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply walked to the head table and placed the envelope in front of Richard. "What is this?" Richard rasped, his voice sounding hollow. "The formal injunction," Beatrice said calmly. "Aegis Cyber Systems has frozen all Thorne Group assets pending the federal investigation. Maya also wanted me to give you this." She pulled a single sheet of paper from the top. It was a notice of eviction for the Thorne estate, effective in 48 hours. She said to remind you of something you told her when she was 10, Beatrice added, her voice steady and cold. That the world doesn't owe anyone a roof they haven't earned. I believe those were your exact words. Sloane let out a jagged, strangled cry, her knees finally giving out as she sank onto the floor, her designer gown pooling around her like a shroud. She looked up, searching for a single friendly face in the cavernous room, but there was no one left. The servers were already beginning to clear the tables, their faces blank and indifferent. The Thorne legacy wasn't just over. It was being dismantled before the coffee had even gone cold. Outside, the sound of a distant siren began to wail, growing louder with every passing second, signaling that the private shame of the ballroom was about to become a very public reckoning. 6 months had passed since the siren's wail had punctuated the end of the Thorne dynasty. Maya Thorne sat in the back of a sleek, unbranded sedan, the quiet hum of the electric motor the only sound in the cabin. She adjusted the cuff of her charcoal blazer, bespoke, hand-stitched, and devoid of a single visible logo. Outside the tinted window, the iron gates of the Thorne estate drifted past, stripped of the family crest that had hung there for 3 decades. The morning air smelled of damp earth and coming snow. It was a clean, sharp scent, one that didn't remind her of the cloying, expensive perfumes that used to choke the hallways of her childhood home. Maya checked her tablet, the screen glowing with the blue light of the Aegis security interface. Her company had just finalized the acquisition of her father's former holdings. It wasn't an act of mercy, it was a tactical consolidation. Richard Thorne was currently navigating the complexities of a white-collar minimum security facility, and Evelyn Thorne had retreated to a small cottage in the countryside, refusing to answer any calls that didn't come from a lawyer. Victory, Maya realized, felt remarkably like silence. She signaled the driver to pull over near a row of modest, brick-faced apartments on the industrial edge of the city. This was the new reality for the woman who had once claimed the world was her personal runway. Sloane Thorne emerged from the building's cramped lobby 5 minutes later. The transformation was jarring. Gone were the 5-inch designer heels and the constant entourage of sycophants. She wore a thin, pilled wool coat that looked a size too small, her once perfect hair pulled back into a utilitarian ponytail that emphasized the hollowing of her cheeks. She was carrying a heavy cardboard box toward a battered sedan that had seen better decades. Maya stepped out of the car. The cold wind nipped at her face, a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled luxury she had just left. Sloane froze, the box slipping an inch in her grip as she noticed the woman standing by the curb. Her eyes, once sharp with entitlement and malice, were now rimmed with the dull, gray exhaustion of someone who had spent the morning arguing with a public defender. "What are you doing here?" Sloane asked. Her voice lacked its usual venom, sounding instead like dry parchment. "Come to watch the final act of the tragedy you wrote?" "I came to give you this," Maya said, her voice level and devoid of the heat that had fueled her for years. She held out a small, manila envelope. Sloane didn't reach for it at first. She looked at Maya's steady hands, then at the expensive car idling at the curb. "Julian Vane is gone, you know. He didn't even wait for the first hearing. He told the press my brand was toxic assets and moved his capital to a firm in Singapore." She let out a short, jagged laugh that died quickly in the wind. "I'm working at a boutique in the mall now. Commission only. They make me wear a plastic name tag, Maya. People recognize me. They take pictures while I'm folding shirts." "It's the deed to the cottage," Maya said, stepping forward to place the envelope on top of the box in Sloane's arms. "It's in Aunt Beatrice's name, but you and your mother can live there. It's far enough away that no one will care about your name tag." Sloane's grip tightened on the cardboard. "What's the catch? You never do anything without a reason." "The condition is simple," Maya replied, her gaze unwavering. "You never use the Thorne name again. Not for a social media handle, not for a business venture, and certainly not for a loan. The accounts are settled. The debt is paid. But the legacy is mine now, and I'm burying it." Sloane looked down at the envelope. For a moment, a flicker of the old fire appeared in her gaze, a flash of the girl who had poured wine over Maya's head just to see her flinch in front of a crowd. But the fire went out, smothered by the weight of the box and the reality of the freezing wind. She nodded once, a jerky, humiliated movement. "We're dead to you, then," Sloane whispered. "No," Maya said, turning back toward her car. "You're just finally equal to everyone else. I imagine for you that feels much worse." She didn't stay to watch Sloane struggle to fit the box into her trunk. As the sedan pulled away, Maya caught a glimpse of her sister in the rearview mirror, a small, solitary figure standing in the shadow of a crumbling brick wall, clutching a manila envelope like a life raft. Maya leaned back into the leather seat and closed her eyes. She had the company. She had the estate. She had the truth. But as she thought of the empty chairs at the dinner table she would never sit at again, and the way her father had looked in that sterile visiting room, she felt the sharp, cold edge of the cost. She had dismantled the monsters, but she had been forced to burn the house down to do it. The car turned onto the main highway, accelerating toward the glass towers of the city. The Thorne name was gone from the gates, but the weight of it would stay with her. A quiet, heavy shadow following the woman who had finally won everything and realized she had no one left to share it with.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.